As Father pointed out at the beginning, today's gospel is Luke's Sermon on the Plain. And it reminded me that we have a pope who does a number of sermons on planes. Was it that bad? Anyway, and there's a great deal of philosophy classes and ethics classes and everything, and the ultimate objective is we try and find a world that is created in harmony and peace and in justice. And indeed, even the preamble of the Constitution states that one of the purposes of the Constitution is in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare. That's an objective we all trying to work for. And yet some 2,000 years ago, Moses made an agreement with God to do basically the same thing. And this is the Mosaic agreement, the Mosaic covenant, which starts off with the 10 Commandments, but then it goes on to some specific things as well. But the whole idea was to have harmony and peace between people, that they may live in peace and live in harmony as well. And these guidelines on how people should treat each other. And yet over the years, people didn't do that, and God sent prophets and other people to remind them that they're not following the Mosaic covenant, they're not following the way of the Lord, and therefore they're not experiencing peace. Some people were experiencing peace, but most of the people were struggling on a day-to-day basis. And today's readings are centered on the Gospel of Luke and his Sermon on the Plain. And he goes through the list of blessings, but then he goes through a list of woes. And part of the process is to bring that covenant back into light. But I want to first go to the first reading, because again, Jeremiah is running into the very same thing. He's working with a community, and a community of Israel that has just lost a battle. Northern Israel is gone because of Assyria, and the current situation is the Babylonian Empire is growing, and it's putting tremendous pressure upon the people of Israel, particularly the city of Jerusalem. And yet, with all this pressure, there's fighting among the people at the top, arguing on what we should do. Now, Jeremiah apparently was counseling that you really need to negotiate with the Babylonians. And I think his intelligence seemed to be much better than the leaders, because he knew that this army was rather large and it was probably going to destroy Jerusalem if it had to. But nevertheless, there's this argument. And he's dealing with a population where about 10% or less of the population controlled everything, had all the money, controlled all that. And they achieved that through unjust processes with the poor people, cheating them out of their land, taxing them out of their money, and so the people were struggling on a day-to-day basis. And this was most of the people in Jerusalem and outside Jerusalem were suffering because of this. And so he's trying to tell them that they have to make a choice. Do they want to worry about the people outside or the strength in flesh, or following the way of the Lord, to trust in the Lord? And I look at that, and often the idea of seeking strength in flesh is following short-term goals. What is good for me today? Not necessarily next week, particularly not in 20, 30 years, but what is good for me tomorrow? And you can see where corrupt businessmen at the time, and probably even today, are more worried about the bottom line today and not what it's going to do in the future. And so Jeremiah is counseling against that. He's saying you need to trust in the Lord. You need to have faith. You need to build an economy and a life that will preserve itself for centuries, not just 10 days or 20 days. And yet, trying to get that point across to them was an uphill battle at best. And as we know, he lost. Jerusalem was sacked by the Babylonians, and most of the people of the elite, that's interesting, the elite were all taken into exile. And so the hard choice is to follow the way of Moses. What did Moses tell us to do? How did Moses tell us to live? And when they stray off of it, countries came in and destroyed them. And we see this particularly in, 1 Kings and 2 Kings and things like that. And so they're called to do that. And because following the Lord is so difficult, it's often questioned, well, why are we doing that? Why are we? And the answer, and I think Paul touches on a little bit about it, is to have faith. Have faith in what God has told us to do. That God, if we follow his way, the good things will happen to us. The good things will come to our benefit. And you know, again, quoting Pope Francis in his Laudato Si, he's arguing that if we don't take care of the climate now, in 10 or 20 years, it's going to take care of us, and probably in a very negative way. I mean, we're already seeing increases in respiratory diseases because of pollution in the air. And so we have to be aware of what's going on today, but what is its impact off in the future? Now, looking at the gospel, again, realize that, again, 90% of the population lived day to day. They were poor, they were day workers, day farmers, and again, they were the subject of unjust rules, unjust taxation, and in reading the history, Herod was great at overtaxing, and then farmers couldn't afford the taxes, so they sold their land, and then they had to find out how to live and take care of their family. And so what Luke is telling, or what Jesus is telling us through Luke, is that the poor will be taken care of. Blessed are the poor, the hungry, the weeping, and those who stand for righteousness. And a lot of this, I think, is enshrined in what I think it was Pope St. John II, St. John Paul II said, is this preferential option for the poor. If we don't take care of the poor, we're not taking care of ourselves, because that will come back and haunt us in days to come. The poor are not because of anything they did, it's because of the unjust system that they were living in. But because of the wealthy that took advantage of them, they were poor. Now it's interesting that Luke then turns the tables on them and tells the wealthy, the rich, you will become poor, you will go hungry, you're going to grieve, and you're going to face the hypocrisy of people praising them, but believing them unjust. And this would happen about 70 years later, when Jerusalem was sacked by the Roman Empire, and all these wealthy people lost everything they had, sometimes their lives included, and they were poor, they were hungry, they were grieved. And so I think the message that both Jeremiah, Luke, or Jesus, and even Moses was trying to say, if you don't take care of the people, all the people, and take care of all that's around you, you're going to pay a heavy price for that in the future. So as we reflect on the teachings of Jeremiah, St. Paul, and St. Luke, let us ask ourselves, where are we in this continuum? Are we focused on the short-term gains we may enjoy, but may have detrimental impact on life? Or are we working on those things that will help us form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and promote the general welfare? Amen.